The year was 1887. The wind blowing across the Nebraska-Wyoming frontier did not whisper. It was a blade that cut away warmth and hope. Coming straight down from a sky the color of old lead, winter had come early and hard, freezing the high plains into iron. The grass was brittle, brown, and buried. Scattered herds of cattle huddled with their backs to the gale, their breath fogging the air for a moment before the wind ripped it away. Far to the south, a dark line of smoke stained the horizon, the mark of the new railroad, a beast of iron and steam pushing west, devouring land and changing the world. Martha Henley felt that wind in her bones. She was 28 years old, a widow, and she was at the end of her strength. The horse beneath her, a gaunt gelding, stumbled with exhaustion. She had nothing left to sell, nothing left to barter, and nowhere left to go. Her husband had been dead 6 months, taken by a fever that burned through their small Dakota homestead in less than a week. She had buried him herself, sold the worthless claim for pennies, and pointed her wagon west, chasing a rumor of work. The wagon had shattered an axle near the Platte River. She had left it, taking only the horse, a blanket, and the clothes she wore. Now, the cold was a living thing, trying to wrap itself around her heart. She saw the ranch as the light began to fail. Garrison Ranch. The name was carved on a weathered plank where the trail forked. It was not a prosperous place, just a long, low plank house, a sturdy barn, and several corrals. A thin, mean wisp of smoke rose from the chimney, not the hearty plume of a warm home, but the grudging breath of a dying fire. Survival. That was the only word left in her mind. She would not die out here. She would not let the prairie wolves find her frozen in a snowdrift. She slid from the horse's back, her legs buckling. She clung to the saddle for a moment, the worn leather cold and stiff beneath her numb fingers. She forced herself to walk, each step a victory against the wind that tore at her thin coat. She reached the porch, a few wooden planks raised above the frozen dirt, and raised her hand. Her knuckles were blue. She balled her hand into a fist and knocked. The sound was flat, swallowed by the wind. She knocked again, harder, putting the last of her will into the sound. The door opened. The man who stood there matched the house. He was tall, perhaps 35 years old, with broad shoulders that filled the doorway. But he was worn down, just like the land. His eyes were the same color as the winter sky, and just as cold. He looked past her first, at the failing light and the coming snow. Then his gaze dropped to her. He did not speak. He did not invite her in. This was Tom Garrison. Martha spoke, her voice a dry rasp. "Sir, my name is Martha Henley. I am a widow. I am looking for work. I can cook. I can clean. I can launder. I can mend. I can mind children." She paused, her breath clouding. "I only ask for shelter through the winter. I am a hard worker. I will earn my keep." Tom Garrison stared at her. His face was hard, carved from the same granite as the nearby hills. He said nothing. He simply stepped back, leaving the door open. It was not an invitation, but a concession to the cold. Martha took it for what it was and stepped inside. The cold followed her in, or perhaps it had been waiting for her. The main room of the ranch house was large, but it was filled with shadows and a profound chill. The great stone hearth that should have been the heart of the home was dead. A few logs smoldered in a sea of gray ash, giving off no heat. The kitchen stove at the far end was black and silent, and there, lying on its side in the cold ashes spilled onto the floor, was a small wooden horse, carved with obvious love, its legs pointing toward the empty ceiling. Then she saw the boy. He was sitting at a long wooden table, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the dead hearth. He was small, perhaps 6 years old. He did not turn when she entered. He did not look at his father. He just stared at the place where the fire should have been. This was Ben, the man's son. Martha remembered the whispers from the last stagecoach stop. Tom Garrison's wife had died of the fever a season ago, and since the day they put her in the ground, the boy had not spoken a single word. The silence in the house was heavier than the wind outside. It was the silence of loss, the silence of a home that had lost its laughter. The wooden horse in the ashes was a monument to that silence. This was not a home. It was a holding place for two men, one large and one small, waiting out the winter. Martha knew the danger she was in. She had walked into a lone man's house, a house steeped in grief and isolation. But she also knew the territory. She had heard the talk. This land was caught in a squeeze. There was the railroad. And then there was Silas Kincaid. Kincaid was a land baron, a contractor for the railroad, a man who believed in progress as long as it lined his own pockets. The whispers said he was forcing ranchers out, using any means necessary. He wanted the water rights. He wanted the grazing routes. And he had help. Sheriff O'Doyle, the law in this part of the territory, was said to be Kincaid's man, bought and paid for. He was a bully with a badge, a man who saw the struggles of homesteaders and ranchers not as tragedies to be eased, but as opportunities to be exploited. Men like Tom Garrison, men who were already down, were prime targets. Kincaid would offer pennies on the dollar, and if they refused, O'Doyle would find a reason to make their lives miserable. Accidents would happen. Cattle would disappear. The tension was not just with the railroad. It was with the land itself. The hunters had been too greedy, slaughtering the bison, pushing the Lakota into smaller and smaller corners, making them desperate. Martha watched Tom Garrison. He was looking at her, but his gaze kept shifting to the single window, toward the dark line of trees at the edge of his property. It was a nervous, practiced look, the look of a man expecting trouble. The men at the stagecoach stop had spoken of him, too. They had spoken of Red Hawk. He was a Lakota warrior, or perhaps a scout, a man of about 30 years who walked between worlds. He traded sometimes, warned others. But mostly he kept his own counsel. The gossip, spoken in hushed tones, was that Red Hawk had known Tom's late wife. They said he had saved her, the winter before last, when she was trapped by a pack of wolves while checking her snare lines. Since her death, some said he still watched the ranch from a distance, a silent guardian or perhaps a ghost. Tom's stare toward the trees was the stare of a man who knew he was being watched, though he did not know if it was by a friend or a foe. All this raced through Martha's mind as she stood dripping melting snow onto the cold floor. The silent boy, the dead hearth, the grieving, hard-eyed owner, the rumors of Kincaid, the threat of O'Doyle, the shadow of Red Hawk. This house was balanced on a knife edge, and she had just walked into the center of it. But the alternative was the wind. The alternative was the freezing dark, the white numbness, the end. She was hungry. She was cold. She was utterly alone. But she was not beaten. She would not die. She stood taller, pulling the last of her dignity around her like a shawl. She had asked for work. She would wait for an answer. The silence in the room stretched, broken only by the howl of the wind in the chimney. A lonely sound in a desperately lonely house. Tom Garrison's gaze was heavy, heavier than the thick woolen blanket Martha wished she had. He did not look at her face. He looked at her hands, raw and chapped from the cold. He looked at the thinness of her coat. He looked at her as a rancher looks at livestock, assessing usability, judging the cost of feed against the value of the work. When he finally spoke, his voice was like gravel scraping against a frozen board. "There is only one job here," he said, the words cutting through the silence of the room. "Wife in my bed." The words hit Martha harder than the wind outside. A hot, ugly flush of shame and anger rose up her neck, momentarily driving out the cold. She had been propositioned by drunkards in saloons, by desperate men on the trail. But this blunt, cold delivery, in front of a silent child and a dead hearth, felt like a special kind of cruelty. She stiffened her spine. She had walked 200 miles. She had buried her own husband. She would not be broken by a word. "I am not that kind of woman," she said. Her voice was low, but it was steady. It was the only weapon she had left. Tom Garrison did not laugh. He did not apologize. He did not even blink. He merely grunted, a short, sharp sound of impatience. "I am not asking about your kind," he said, stepping back and kicking the door shut. The latch clicked with a terrible finality. The wind howled, denied its entry. "I am stating a fact. This is a hard place. You see this house." He did not wait for an answer. He gestured with a broad, rough hand at the empty room. "It needs a woman's hand. It needs sweeping. It needs a fire. It needs bread. I cannot do it. I have the cattle. I have the fences. I cannot do both. I cannot." His gaze shifted to the small boy at the table, who had not moved, had not even looked at them. "He needs warmth," Tom Garrison said, and his voice, for a heartbeat, almost broke. "His mother, she is gone. The house is cold. He is cold. He needs a woman's voice, even if he will not answer it." He turned back to her, his expression hard again, the moment of vulnerability gone. "And I need a wife. I need it on paper. Silas Kincaid is squeezing this valley. His man, Sheriff O'Doyle. He comes by every week. He looks at my house. He looks at my boy. He sees a man failing. He sees a man who cannot manage. A man alone, with a silent son, is a target. A man with a new wife. A home that is kept, that is different. That is stability." He looked her square in the eyes. "This is a contract. You come in. You keep the house. You are a mother to the boy. You are Mrs. Garrison to the world. And I," he nodded toward the door, "I keep the wind from killing you. I put food in your belly and a roof over your head through the winter. That is the job." Martha was speechless. This was not a proposition. This was a bill of lading. This was a merger of two desperate, failing enterprises. She was being offered to trade her name for his protection, her labor for his provision. Her eyes scanned the room, truly seeing it for the first time. He was right. The place was collapsing in on itself. There were 3 chairs at the long table. One was pushed back, coated in dust. That must have been his wife's. One was the boy's small chair. And one, at the head of the table, was Tom's. The wood beneath his plate was slightly cleaner than the rest. It was the only part of the house that still looked alive. And the horse, the small wooden horse, lying abandoned in the cold ashes, a toy, forgotten when the joy left the house. This man was not looking for comfort in his bed. He was looking for a barricade. He was looking for a pair of hands to help him hold the line against the winter, against Kincaid, against the crushing grief that had silenced his son. He had used the ugliest words possible, but he was offering her the one thing she craved: survival. She took a slow breath, the cold air burning her lungs. "I cannot accept such a proposal." His face darkened. He thought she was refusing. "Not tonight," she said quickly. "Tonight, I am a traveler seeking shelter. You will give it to me. I will work for my supper. In the morning, we can speak of contracts." She set her own terms. "But for tonight, I have conditions." He raised an eyebrow. A woman with nothing, making demands. "I will have a room that locks from the inside. I will be safe." "Done," he said, jerking his head toward a narrow door. "The storage pantry. It has a cot and a bolt." "Second," she said, "I will be treated with respect, not as the job you described." "You have my word," he said, his voice flat. "I am not a monster, madam, just a practical man." "And third," she looked at the boy. "Ben." His small back was rigid. "The boy. You will not force me on him. He will not be told to call me mother. He will not be told to speak to me at all. He will choose, if he ever chooses. That is my price for staying the night." Tom Garrison looked at his son. He watched the small shoulders, the head that would not turn. He nodded once, a sharp, defeated gesture. That is fair. He does not listen to me anyway. Then show me the kitchen, Martha said. I will not be idle. The storage room was little more than a closet, cold and smelling of mice and dried beans, but the bolt on the door was sturdy. She left her meager bindle on the cot and went back to the main room. The kitchen was a cold, dark corner. The stove was black. The flour bin was low. The lard was hard as a rock. The molasses thick and slow. But it was enough. She found the kindling. She found the matches. She worked with a practiced, desperate efficiency. She broke the rules of hospitality and took charge of this man's hearth. She built the fire first, stacking the wood in the stove, coaxing the flame. The sound of the crackling wood was the first sign of life in the house. Then she attacked the hearth, clearing the old, cold ashes, careful to set the small wooden horse on the mantel. Before building a proper fire, the room, slowly, began to lose its tomb-like chill. She worked. She mixed flour, lard, and water. She found a heavy iron skillet. Soon, the smell of frying dough, of hot flapjacks, began to fill the room, warring with the smell of old ash and sorrow. It was a good smell. It was the smell of survival. She did not call them to eat. She set 3 plates on the table, poured 3 cups of water, and put a stack of the hot, greasy flapjacks in the center. She sat down in the dusty, unused chair, his wife's chair, and began to eat. Tom Garrison sat opposite her. He ate like a man who had forgotten food had flavor, simply fueling his body. He shoveled the food into his mouth. Ben, the boy, was the challenge. He sat, still staring, but his head was turned slightly. He was watching the steam rise from the food. "There is molasses," Martha said to the room. She did not look at him. She just pushed the jug slightly toward the center of the table. For 5 minutes, the only sound was the wind, the crackle of the fire, and the scrape of forks on plates. Then, slowly, the small boy slid off his chair. He did not go to the food. He walked to the hearth. He stood there, looking at the fire, the first real fire he had likely seen in weeks. He looked up at the wooden horse on the mantel. He reached up, his small hand grasping it. He turned. Martha did not look at him. She kept eating her flapjack. She could feel his small, intense gaze on her. He walked to the table, not to his chair, but to hers. He stood beside her, so close his sleeve brushed her arm. She continued to eat. She did not want to frighten him. He held the horse in his hand. Then, with a quiet, deliberate motion, he placed the small wooden horse on the table, just to the right of her plate. Martha stopped chewing. She swallowed. She looked down at the horse. It was a simple toy, but it was everything. It was a truce. It was a token. She looked at him. His face was pale and thin, his eyes too large. She gave him a small, slow nod. Just one. He stared at her for another second, then slid back into his own chair. He reached out a small, trembling hand, took a flapjack, and began to eat it. Dry. Tom Garrison watched the entire exchange, his face unreadable. They finished the meal in that charged silence. Martha stood, collected the plates, and moved to the wash basin. There was no hot water, but she did not care. She would heat it. As she worked, Tom moved to a small, slanted desk in the corner. He opened a thick leather-bound book, a ledger. The light from the new fire cast flickering shadows on the page. She heard him curse, a low, frustrated sound. "This is it," he said, more to himself than to her. He stabbed a finger at a page. "Half the herd, gone. That damn foot and mouth disease." He turned a page, and Kincaid knows it. He has been counting. He knows what I am worth. He knows I cannot feed the rest through a hard winter. He looked up, and his eyes met hers. The hardness was gone, replaced by a deep, weary desperation. "The flour bin," he said. It is half full. That is the last of it. There is cornmeal for the stock. There is coffee, maybe for a week. We are looking at a hard freeze, and I am already 2 months behind. He was not just offering her a contract. He was showing her the terms of his own surrender. He was bankrupt. In food, in hope, in warmth. Martha dried her hands on her skirt. She looked at the man. She looked at the boy, who was now asleep, his head on the table. She looked at the wooden horse still sitting by her empty plate. And outside, the wind howled, a physical blow against the side of the house. It rattled the door in its frame. It sounded like a wolf, hungry, circling, demanding to be let in. The wind was a third person in the room, an executioner waiting for them all. Martha Henley, widow, 28 years old, picked up the wooden horse. She walked to the boy, lifted his small, sleeping head, and slid the toy underneath his cheek, a proper pillow. She looked at Tom Garrison. "I will take the pantry room," she said, "and I will light the stove again at 5 in the morning. Good night, Mr. Garrison." She walked to the small, cold room, stepped inside, and slid the heavy wooden bolt into place. She was safe. She was warm. She was, for tonight, employed. But she knew, as she lay down in the freezing dark, that the wind was right. The contract had already been signed. The light that woke Martha was not a proper dawn. It was a grudging gray illumination that filtered through the single, soot-stained window, revealing a world that had frozen solid overnight. It was not yet 5 o'clock, but she was already dressed, the cold from the pantry floor having seeped into her bones. She slid the bolt, the wood scraping loudly in the quiet house, and stepped into the main room. Tom Garrison was asleep in his chair by the dead hearth, a blanket thrown over him, his boots still on. The boy, Ben, was a small lump on the cot that had been pulled near the stove. The wooden horse clutched in his hand. They had survived the night. Martha moved with a quiet purpose. She did not owe this man a contract, but she had accepted his shelter, and she would pay for it in work. She rebuilt the fire in the hearth, this time with a proper backlog, and soon had the stove crackling. The smell of coffee, weak but hot, began to fill the air. She was kneading a stiff dough, all she could make from the low flour, when a movement at the edge of the property caught her eye. Through the window, past the corrals, where the line of dark trees met the snow-covered pasture, a figure sat on a horse. He was still, silhouetted against the gray sky. A Lakota. She knew instantly. He wore a buffalo robe, and his horse was an Appaloosa, its spots stark in the pale light. He was simply watching the house. As she watched, he dismounted. He walked to the main fence post, the one nearest the trees, and tied a small bundle of what looked like dried plants to it. He laid a hand on the post for a moment, a gesture that looked almost like a prayer, then swung back onto his horse. He did not look at the house again, but melted back into the trees. Martha heard a sound behind her. Tom Garrison was awake. He was standing by the door, his gaze fixed on the spot where the rider had been. His face was a mask of iron. "He does that sometimes," Tom said, his voice rough with sleep. Since last year." "Who is he?" Martha asked, though she suspected she knew. "Red Hawk," Tom said. He walked to the stove, poured a cup of coffee, and his hand was not quite steady. "He saved my wife, Mary. The winter before last, wolves. She talked to him, traded with him. He seems to think he still owes her something." "What did he leave?" "Herbs. For fever." Tom drank the coffee, black and scalding. "She used them for the boy." He stared into the cup. "He is leaving them for me now. I suppose I let them hang there until the wind takes them." He would not. Martha saw. Go and get them. He would not accept the gesture, but he would not disrespect it by throwing it away. He was a man trapped between pride and grief. He grabbed his coat. I have to ride to the stagecoach stop, see if the mail brought any news, or any offers." The last word was bitter. "Be careful," Martha said. He just grunted and left, the cold air swirling in as the door shut. The morning passed in a flurry of domestic battle. Martha attacked the grime. She swept, she scrubbed, she aired out the stale blankets, grimacing at the smell. She was not making a home. She was sanitizing a wound. Ben watched her. He did not help. He did not speak. He just sat by the fire, his eyes following her every move. The wooden horse held in a white-knuckled grip. It was nearly noon when Tom returned. He rode his horse hard into the yard, not even bothering to cool it down. He burst into the house, his face a thundercloud. "He has done it," he spat, throwing his gloves onto the table. "That devil Kincaid!" Martha stopped wiping the table. "Done what?" "He was at the stop. Had a meeting with the 6 ranchers who are left. He is closing the North Passage, fencing it off. Claims it is railroad land now, though the survey is not even done." "He cannot do that," Martha said. "That is the winter grazing road." "He can," Tom said, his voice low and furious. "He is, and he told us, he said, any man who thinks a fence is an accident will soon have a real accident, a fire, or sick cattle, or maybe just a stray bullet." He said it in front of all of Bill Johnson and the others. And nothing. They just stared at their boots. He has them all terrified. He knows my herd is sick. He knows Johnson is in debt. He is picking us off, one by one. The very air in the cabin seemed to grow colder, heavier. The threat was no longer a rumor. It was a noose, and it was tightening. They had no time to digest the news. A new sound joined the wind, the jingle of a harness, the clop of heavy-set hooves. A large man on a large, sweating horse pulled up to the porch. He wore a heavy coat and a badge that gleamed, even in the dull light. Sheriff O'Doyle. Tom stepped onto the porch. Martha moved to stand in the doorway, her hands wrapped in her apron. O'Doyle did not dismount. He was a big man, his face red with cold and good living. He looked at Tom, but his eyes kept sliding to Martha. "Afternoon. Garrison," he said, his voice a jovial boom that did not match his cold eyes. "Just doing my rounds, making sure all is secure." "All is secure, Sheriff," Tom said, his voice flat. "Is it?" O'Doyle leaned on his saddle horn, his gaze lingering on Martha. "I heard you were struggling. Tom, heard about your herd, heard about your boy. I did not know you were struggling so badly you had to take in boarders." The insinuation hung in the cold air, thick and ugly. "This town," O'Doyle continued, "is a decent place. We like to keep it that way. We do not look kindly on irregular arrangements. A woman, alone, in a widower's house. It looks bad. Garrison, it makes decent folk uncomfortable." Martha felt the blood drain from her face. He was talking about her. He was painting her as a whore, a vagrant, a problem he could solve. This was Kincaid's other weapon. Not fences, but shame. Tom was silent for a long moment. He was cornered. He could throw her out, and she would freeze or be arrested by O'Doyle before she made it a mile. Or he could stand his ground. And O'Doyle would have his excuse. He would declare this an unfit home, perhaps even threaten to take Ben. Tom turned his head and looked at Martha. She met his gaze. Her face was pale, but her eyes were steady. She did not plead. She waited. He turned back to the sheriff. "She is not a boarder, O'Doyle." "No." "She is my intended," Tom said, the words clear and cold as the air. "We are to be married by the end of the week." O'Doyle's thick eyebrows shot up. He was genuinely surprised. This was not in his calculations. He looked at Martha, then back at Tom, a slow, suspicious smile spreading across his face. "Is that so? Quick work, Garrison? Very quick. My congratulations." He tipped his hat to Martha. a mocking, insolent gesture. "Ma'am, I will be sure to tell the good people in town the news. We will all rest easier." He turned his horse, dug his heels in, and rode away. Whistling, the threat was gone. For now. Tom Garrison stood on the porch, watching him go. His shoulders slumped. He walked back inside, past Martha, and kicked the door shut. "You had no right," Martha said, her voice shaking with a cold fury O'Doyle had not been able to produce. "I had every right," Tom shot back, his frustration exploding. "He is O'Doyle. He would have run you out of the territory by noon. He would have arrested you for vagrancy, for prostitution, for breathing too hard. He works for Kincaid. This was a test, and if I failed it, he would have torn this place apart. Now he cannot." He ran his hands through his hair. "I bought you protection. I bought us protection. A married man, a family man. He is harder to push. A lone widower is a stray. He is Kincaid's man, and he just found out his boss cannot push me over. Not today." Martha stood by the cold stove. He was right. The brutal, ugly truth was that he was right. He had saved her, and in doing so, he had chained her to him. "This changes the terms," she said, her voice quiet. "What terms you had shelter for a night?" "No, this changes the job you offered," she said, meeting his eyes. "That proposal you made last night, it is not talk anymore. It is real. If I am to be your wife on paper, if I am to wear that name to keep that man away from me, then I will have my conditions." Tom crossed his arms. "Go on." "First," she said, "I am done with the pantry. If I am to be Mrs. Garrison to the world, I will not be sleeping with the mice. I take the main bedroom, your wife's room, and I expect it to be kept warm. I will have a fire." He winced, a flicker of pain, but he nodded. "Done." "Second, I am not your servant. You said this house needs a woman's hand. Fine, but the hand that works is the hand that decides. I will run this house. I will control the household spending. What little there is, I decide on the flour, the cloth, the meals. You will not question me on it. You will give me that respect." This was harder for him. She was asking for power. "That is fine, within reason." "It is not within reason," she said. "It is my condition. You get the cattle, I get the house. All of it." He stared at her, this small, frozen woman who was now bargaining for his home. He nodded. "Done." "Third." She looked over at Ben, who had watched the entire exchange with O'Doyle with wide, terrified eyes. "The boy. It stays as I said. He comes to me. You do not force him. You do not tell him I am his new mother. You do not ever, ever put him in the middle of this. That is my price. Mr. Garrison, all three." He let out a long breath, a sound of defeat, or perhaps relief. "Done and done. It is a fair bargain." The words hung in the air. A bargain, a contract. As if on cue, the world outside the window darkened. A profound, heavy shadow fell over the land. Tom moved to the window. "Snow," he said, his voice flat. "A real one. The sky is full." He looked at Martha. "The cattle, they are in the north pasture. They will drift with the wind. They will scatter." He was already moving, grabbing his heaviest coat, his rifle from the rack, a coil of rope. He had to go. He had to save what was left of his herd. The anxiety in the room was a living thing. Ben let out a small, strangled sound. He ran, not to his father, but to a peg by the door where an older, sheepskin-lined coat of Tom's hung. He pulled it down, a great, heavy weight, and ran to Martha. He pushed it at her. "What, Ben?" she asked gently, kneeling. He said nothing, his small face screwed up in a knot of pure terror. He just pushed the coat at her, his eyes darting to the door his father was preparing to walk out of. Martha understood. He was not giving her the coat to go with him. He was giving it to her because she was the one who stayed. His mother had left and never come back. His father was leaving now. He was transferring the responsibility, the very weight of the house, onto her shoulders. She was the anchor now. She took the coat from him and put it on. It was huge. It swallowed her. It smelled of leather and cold air and the faint, lost scent of the woman who had worn it before her. Ben's shoulders relaxed. Just a fraction. She had accepted the burden. Tom nodded at her, a strange look in his eye. "Keep the fire hot." He opened the door and stepped into the first few flakes. Martha went to the window, the heavy coat sleeves hanging past her hands. She watched him ride out, a dark figure against a gathering white. Her eye caught a disturbance in the snow near the tree line, near the fence post where Red Hawk had been. It was not a man. It was tracks. She pulled the door open, the wind trying to rip it from her hand. She stepped onto the porch. She could see them clearly now. Hoof prints. Not Tom's horse. She knew his. Not her own gaunt gelding in the barn. And not the small, unshod prints of a Lakota pony. These were shod horses, at least two of them. They had been in the trees, watching. They had been studying the lay of the pasture. A cold dread, deeper than the weather, settled in her heart. Kincaid, accidents, sick cattle. Tom's cattle were not just going to drift in the storm. Someone was planning to help them drift. Someone was planning to steal them, under the cover of the blizzard, and blame the storm. Or perhaps blame the Lakota. This was how Kincaid bankrupted a man. Tom was riding right into it. The wind was a roar now. The snow was no longer falling in flakes, but in a solid, horizontal wall of white. Tom was already gone, swallowed by the storm. Ben's small face appeared at the window, his hand pressed to the glass. Martha looked at the barn. She saw the long coil of heavy rope hanging by the door. She looked at the house, her sanctuary. She looked at the white fury that had taken Tom. This was no longer a bargain. It was not a contract. This was a choice. She ran, stumbling in the heavy coat, to the barn. She grabbed the rope. She ran back to the porch, her fingers already numb. She tied one end, thick and stiff, around the main support beam of the porch. She tested the knot. It would hold. She wrapped the other end around her waist, tying it securely. This was her lifeline. This rope was the only thing that would tether her to the house, to the boy. She pulled the unfamiliar, heavy coat tighter. She looked at the small face in the window. "I am coming back," she yelled, though the wind stole the words from her mouth. She stepped off the porch and into the wall of white, the rope playing out behind her. She had chosen. This was her family now, and she would not let the storm take them. The world was white. It was not a color. It was the absence of everything. The wind was a solid, screaming wall that stole her breath and drove ice needles into her eyes. Martha pulled the collar of Tom's heavy coat up, but the cold found her. She was blind, 10 feet from the porch, and already felt the terrifying pull of the void. Then the rope jerked at her waist. It was her anchor. It was the only real thing in the universe. The house was at the end of that rope. Ben was at the end of that rope. She planted her feet, lowered her head, and began to walk. Not by sight, but by feeling the tension in the line. She moved in a slow arc, searching, screaming Tom's name into a wind that ripped the sound from her lips and tore it to shreds. She was heading toward the north pasture, but she knew she could not go that far. The hayricks. He would have gone to the hayricks, the closest ones, to check the canvas covers. She aimed for the large, dark shape she could barely distinguish through the white chaos. The rope went taut. She had reached its end. She was perhaps 100 feet from the house. She pulled, but the knot on the porch held. She could go no further. He was lost. The wind was too strong, the snow too deep. "Tom!" she screamed, a sound of pure desperation. She pulled on the rope, a signal to the boy in the window that she was still there. And then she saw it, a low mound, a darkness at the base of the hayrick that did not belong. It was his horse. The animal was down, its neck at an awful angle, already half covered by a drift, and beneath it, pinned or just fallen beside it, was Tom. She clawed her way through the snow. He was not moving. His face was a mask of ice, his hat gone. "Tom!" she yelled, shaking him. His eyes fluttered open, gray and cloudy with pain. "Martha," he gasped. The name was a shock. "My leg, it is... Horse fell, I think." He tried to move, and a terrible guttural sound of agony was torn from him. "It is broken. We are going home," she said. She was not asking. She was telling. She could not lift him. He was a great, heavy man, and she was tied to the house. She looked at the rope around her waist. It was her lifeline, and now it was his. She untied the knot from her own waist, her fingers numb, fumbling with the frozen hemp. She would not lose this. She looped it under his arms, around his chest, and tied a knot she had learned from her father, one that would not slip. "Hold on," she commanded. She turned her back to him, facing the house. She grabbed the rope and leaned into it. All her weight, all her will. She was now the horse, and he was the burden. She began to walk, pulling, her boots slipping in the snow. He groaned, a continuous sound of pain as his broken leg was dragged through the drift. "Pull!" she screamed at herself. "Pull!" She fell to her knees. She got up. She pulled again. Each step was a small, agonizing victory. She was not walking. She was hauling. The distance was immense. Impossible. But the porch light was there, a dim yellow star in the white hell. She reached the steps. She could not pull him up. She was spent. She fell against the door, banging on it with her fist. "Ben." The door flew open. The boy stood there, his small face a mask of terror. But he was present. He saw his father, a broken heap on the porch. He did not cry. He grabbed the other end of the blanket Tom was lying on. Together, the woman and the child dragged the master of the house inside, over the threshold, and slammed the door, barring the storm. Tom was unconscious, or near it. He lay melting snow and mud onto the floor. The room was chaos. "Ben," Martha said, her voice sharp, cutting through the panic. "The stove, more wood, now, and the big pot, fill it with snow. We need hot water." The boy, for the first of what would be many times, did exactly as she said. Martha took a knife from the kitchen. She cut Tom's heavy wool trousers from his leg, shredding the fabric. She did not wince. She had seen worse. The break was bad. Below the knee, his leg lay at an angle that was wrong, a sickening, unnatural bend. The bone was not out of the skin, but it was close. "Tom!" She shook his shoulder. He groaned. "Tom, you must listen to me. I have to set this. If I do not, you will lose the leg. Do you understand?" His eyes focused on her, blurry with pain. Yes." "Ben," she called. The boy was back. "Come here. I need you." He shrank back. "I need you," she said, her voice softer, but harder. "Too. You must come here and hold your father's hand. You must hold it as tight as you can, and you must not look at his leg. You must look at his face, and you must count, just count your breaths, out loud. Do not stop counting until I tell you. Can you do that for him?" The small boy, his eyes wide with a terror she could not imagine, walked to his father's head. He looked at the broken man. He took a small, shuddering breath. He reached out and slipped his small hand into Tom's huge, calloused one. "1," Ben whispered, his voice rusty. "2." Martha looked at Tom. "This is it. Bite on this." She shoved a piece of leather from the saddlebag into his hand. He put it between his teeth. 3, Ben whispered. Martha took a deep breath. She put one hand on Tom's knee, the other on his ankle. She set her shoulders. 4. She pulled. A scream, muffled by the leather, filled the cabin. It was a sound that did not belong to a human. Tom's whole body arched off the floor. "Hold him!" Martha yelled. Ben, tears streaming down his face, threw his small body over his father's arm, his grip white. 5, 6. The bone grated, a sound like stones grinding together. Martha, sweating, her own body shaking, pulled harder, turning, aligning the brake. Tom's head thrashed, and then he went limp. He had fainted. 7, 8. She felt it, the click, the moment the two ends of the bone slid back into alignment. 9. She slumped back, her arms trembling. "You can stop, Ben," she said, her voice a ragged gasp. The boy did not stop. He was clinging to his father's hand, his eyes squeezed shut. 10, 11, 12. "Ben," she said, gently. "It is done. He is all right. You can stop." The boy opened his eyes. He looked at his father, now pale and unconscious. He looked at the leg, which Martha was already wrapping. He looked at her, and he did not let go of his father's hand. For 3 days, the storm raged. For 3 days, the world was only that room. Tom Garrison was a feverish, pained prisoner on the cot, his leg bound between 2 splints made from a broken chair back, propped on a pillow. The house changed, the contract, the bargain, the terms, all of it was blown away by the storm. There was only survival. Martha was in charge. The hearth, which had been a cold mouth of ash, now held a fire that did not go out. The stove, which had been a block of black iron, was now the center of their lives. The smells in the cabin were no longer of dust and grief. They were the smells of wood smoke, of weak, boiled coffee, and of baking. Martha was magic with the last of the flour. She made thin, savory biscuits. She made a hot, thin porridge. She made the house smell like a home. And she talked, in the long, howling dark of the nights. As she checked Tom's fever and Ben huddled by the fire, she told stories. She did not tell stories of her grief. She told stories of her childhood, of a stubborn goat named General, of her mother's garden, of the time she fell in a river and came out wearing a fish. Tom, in his lucid moments, would just watch her. This woman, who he had treated as chattel, who he had insulted with his cold proposal, was now saving him with a fierceness that humbled him. He had offered her a cold bargain. She had given him life. He was ashamed, and he was grateful, and he did not know what to do with either feeling. Ben was her shadow. He brought her wood. He sat at the table, carving on his wooden horse with Tom's knife. He listened. On the 3rd night, Tom's fever broke. He was sleeping, a real healing sleep. The storm was quieting, its rage spent. Martha sat by the fire, mending one of Tom's shirts. Ben sat on the hearth, watching the flames. "And so," Martha said softly, finishing a story, "the fox just sat there, with the entire apple pie on his head, and he pretended he had no idea where it went. Ben," his small face illuminated by the firelight, made a sound. It was a small, rusty puff of air. Martha looked at him. A slow, tentative, unsteady smile was spreading across his face. It was the first one. It was a crack in the ice. The house was breathing again. On the 4th morning, the world was silent. The storm was gone. The sun rose on a landscape that was blindingly white, new and dangerous. When Martha stepped outside, the air was so cold it hurt to breathe, and she saw the tracks. Near the north pasture, where the drifts were deepest, the snow was churned. It was not the wandering, confused tracks of cattle drifting in a storm. It was the mark of a drive. 2, perhaps 3, shod horses had been there. They had pushed the herd, what was left of it, south, toward Kincaid's land. Tom, leaning on a rough crutch, stood in the doorway. He saw the tracks and his face went grim. He did it. That thief. He used the storm. He stole them. But there was another mark. Later that day, Martha walked the fence line, checking for damage. On the fence post, the one where Red Hawk had left the herbs, there was a new sign carved into the wood, fresh and sharp, was a symbol of bison, and above it, 2 crossed arrows. When she described it to Tom, his face grew even darker. "It is a warning," he said, rubbing his splinted leg. "From Red Hawk, the arrows, they mean trespass, war. The bison, that is the Lakota hunting ground, the one by the creek. Kincaid's men are not just stealing cattle, they are poaching. They are hunting the winter herd." A week passed. Tom was healing, his body mending, but his spirit was trapped. He was a prisoner in his own home, forced to watch as Martha took command. He watched her move. He watched her work. She was not just cleaning. She was claiming the space. She found his late wife's things packed in a trunk with a gentle, unspoken apology. She took out a thick, warm wool blanket and put it on his cot. She found a pair of old curtains, washed them, and hung them. The gray, accusing light of the cabin was softened. She moved Ben's cot out of the dark corner and placed it near the hearth. She gathered his wooden horse, a few scattered whittling blocks, a piece of string, and put them on a crate beside it. She made him a space. Tom watched, his heart at war. This was what he had wanted, a woman's hand. But this was not what he had meant. He had meant a servant. He had gotten a partner, and it terrified him. The bad news came on the back of a tired horse. Bill Johnson, his nearest neighbor, rode into the yard. He looked like a man who had seen a ghost. "Tom," he said, not even getting down. He spoke from the saddle, his voice dead. "It is over. Kincaid has won." "What are you talking about, Bill?" Tom said from the porch. "The railroad?" Johnson said. "I was at the stop. The new survey maps came in. He is not going south, around the hills. He is coming straight through." "Through where?" Johnson spat on the snow. "Right across the head of the creek. He is going to dam it, divert it for the steam engines. He is taking the water. Tom." Martha, who had come to the door, felt a chill that had nothing to do with the snow. The creek. It was the only water source for the entire valley in the dry season. The herds, the farms, the houses, they all drank from it. Kincaid did not need to steal their cattle. He did not need to burn them out. He just had to turn off the water, and in 6 months, he would own the valley for nothing. The news about the creek cut through the thin optimism of the past week. It was a death sentence, delivered on a surveyor's map. The small, hard-won warmth of the Garrison Ranch house felt suddenly false, a brief stay against an inevitable end. Word spread, as it always did, carried by men like Bill Johnson, who rode from one desperate homestead to the next. Kincaid, it turned out, was not just a bully. He was a gracious victor. He called a community meeting. It was to be held on Sunday, after services at the combination post office and church, the only public building in the settlement. He was going to explain the benefits of the new route. "We have to go," Tom said. He was standing by the window, his weight resting heavily on the crutch Martha had fashioned for him. His leg was mending, but it was a slow, angry process. "You are in no condition to ride," Martha replied, her hands deep in a bucket of hot suds. She was washing the curtains, a defiant act of normalcy. "I will ride in the wagon, slowly. You will drive. We have to go." His jaw was set. "I will not let him carve up my land and my water without looking him in the eye." "He will have O'Doyle there," she said quietly. "I know. He will have paid men in the crowd. I know that, too." He turned from the window. "But if we are not there, he wins. He will say we were not present to object. He will say we consented by our absence." Martha looked at Ben. The boy was sitting by the hearth, the smile from that one night long gone, replaced by the old, watchful silence. He was listening, He understood the fear in the room. "We will all go," Martha said. "A decision. He will not see this family as broken. He will see us as whole. Ben will come too." Tom nodded, a look of grim agreement passing between them. Sunday arrived with a bright, cold sun that offered no warmth. The snow was packed hard. The wagon ride was a jarring, painful misery for Tom. He sat on the buckboard, his splinted leg propped up on a sack of feed, his face pale and beaded with sweat. Martha handled the reins, her expression calm, her knuckles white. Ben sat between them, a small, silent figure bundled in a blanket. The church was packed. It was not a large building, and the smell of wet wool, stale coffee, and fear was overpowering. Every rancher who was left in the valley was there, their faces worn and anxious. Silas Kincaid stood at the front, by the preacher's podium. He was a stark contrast to the ranchers. He was dressed in a fine city suit, his boots polished, a thick gold watch chain draped across his vest. He was smiling. Beside him, leaning against the wall with his thumbs hooked in his belt, was Sheriff O'Doyle. The preacher, a nervous man named Pastor Miles, opened with a prayer that sounded more like a plea for deliverance. Then Kincaid stepped up. His voice was smooth, like oiled machinery. He spoke of progress, he spoke of civilization. He painted a picture of a new town, with stores, a proper school, and land values that would triple overnight. "This railroad, gentlemen," he said, beaming at them, "is not a burden. It is a gift. It is the artery of a new nation, and it will bring lifeblood to this valley. Yes, it means change. Progress always means change, but it is change for the better." A few men in the back, men Martha did not recognize, clapped loudly. "That is right," one of them shouted. "Time to move on. Old-timers." The ranchers just shifted in their seats. "The new route," Kincaid continued, "is a necessity of engineering. It is the most direct, the most stable ground. And yes, it will require us to manage the water, to harness the creek for the good of all, to power the engines that will bring your cattle to market." Bill Johnson stood up, his hat clutched in his hands. "Mr. Kincaid, sir, that creek, it is all we have in the dry season. If you dam it, you kill us, you kill our stock." Kincaid's smile became one of pity. "Mr. Johnson, you are thinking in the short term. The railroad will be digging wells. There will be water for purchase, for those who are part of this new enterprise, for those who adapt." He let the threat hang in the air. "Sell to me, or die of thirst." The room was split. Some men looked desperate. Others, the ones who had less to lose, looked tempted by Kincaid's promise of easy money. A new voice spoke, from the back of the room. It was deep, and it spoke in a language Martha did not understand. Lakota. Every head turned. Red Hawk stood in the open doorway, the cold air swirling around him. He was not dressed for a meeting. He was dressed as a warrior, in hides and wool, his face proud, his eyes fixed on Kincaid. "What is this?" O'Doyle said, his hand moving to his pistol. "Get him out of here. Pastor, this is a meeting of citizens." "He is a citizen of this land," Pastor Miles said, his voice trembling but gaining an unexpected strength. "He asked to speak, and I, as a man of God, will translate." Red Hawk spoke again, his voice calm, his words measured. Pastor Miles listened, then turned to the crowd. "He says," the pastor translated, "that the iron horse you speak of is a serpent. He says it will crush the bones of the earth. He says the route you have chosen, the route you call stable ground, runs through the graves of his ancestors." A stunned, uncomfortable silence filled the room. Kincaid's smile faltered, replaced by a flash of annoyance. Red Hawk spoke again. "He says the creek does not belong to the railroad. It does not belong to the ranchers. It belongs to the land, and to all who drink from it. He says the iron horse will also crush the bison, the last of the herd he and his people depend on. He asks that you move the route south, to the hills. He says there, it will harm no graves, and the water can be shared. It was a plea. It was a reasonable, dignified request. Before Kincaid could answer, O'Doyle stepped forward. "That is enough," he boomed. "We are not here to listen to superstitious nonsense from a troublemaker. This is a business meeting. This Indian has no standing here. He has no deed. He has no claim." "He has a claim," a voice cut through the tension. It was Martha. She was standing. Ben, terrified, clutched at her coat. Tom, surprised, looked up at her. O'Doyle turned, his face purpling. "What did you say, woman?" Martha's heart was pounding so hard she thought it would break her ribs, but her voice was clear. "I said, he has a claim. His people were here before any deed was written. He came here to speak in peace. He has a right to be heard." "She is right," Tom Garrison said. He was struggling, pushing himself up on his crutch. The effort was immense, and a gasp of pain escaped him. But he got to his feet. He stood, swaying slightly, his gaze locked with O'Doyle's. "This is a church, and this is my intended. She is right. Let the man speak." The room was electric. Tom Garrison, the broken widower, had just publicly allied himself with a Lakota warrior and the strange woman he called his intended. He had given Martha his voice, his authority, and she had used it. Kincaid saw he was losing control. The ranchers were looking at Tom, at Martha, at Red Hawk, and they were seeing something other than fear. They were seeing decency. Martha seized the moment. She was not a warrior. She was not a rancher. She was a widow. She knew how to bargain. "Oh, Mr. Kincaid is right about one thing," she said, and all eyes turned back to her. "We are divided. We are fighting over scraps. The ranchers fear the Lakota will break their fences. The Lakota fear the hunters will kill their bison. And while we all fight, the railroad comes and takes the water from all of us." She looked at Red Hawk. "He is asking to share the water. He is asking to protect his dead." She then turned to the ranchers. "What if we made our own treaty here today? A local treaty?" "What kind of treaty?" Bill Johnson asked, his voice hopeful. "We," Martha said, gesturing to the ranchers, "pledge to stop the reckless slaughter. No more hunting bison for sport. No more leaving carcasses to rot. We respect their food source." She looked back at Red Hawk. "And in exchange, they pledge to respect our fences, to help watch for men, like the ones who stole Mr. Garrison's herd in the storm. And together, all of us, we share the water. We all go to the railroad, not as scattered, frightened men, but as one valley, and we demand they move the route." It was a bold, impossible idea, but it was the first good idea anyone had heard in months. A murmur of agreement went through the ranchers. Red Hawk stared at Martha. He spoke one sentence. "He says," Pastor Miles translated, a small smile on his face, "that the woman speaks with a strong heart. He says his people will honor such a paper, if the white men will." Kincaid was furious. He had been outmaneuvered. "This is absurd. This meeting is over," he snapped. "I think," Tom Garrison said, his voice loud, "it is just beginning." The meeting broke up in chaos, but not the chaos Kincaid had intended. People were talking, arguing, but they were planning. For the first time, they were not just victims. That night, the Garrison Ranch was quiet. Tom had not spoken much on the ride home, but he had looked at Martha with a new respect that was more comforting than any words. Ben, too, seemed to sense the shift. He sat close to Martha as she fixed supper, the wooden horse in his lap. They ate, and for the first time it felt less like a bargain and more like a family. The warning came just after midnight. Martha was woken by a smell, acrid, sharp, smoke. She bolted from the main bedroom, the one that was hers now. The main room was clear, but the smell was stronger. Tom, wake up. He was already moving, grabbing his crutch, his eyes wild. What is it? Smoke. Ben was crying, a thin, terrified wail. Tom threw the front door open. The night was lit, bright as day. In a sickening, flickering orange. The barn was on fire. No, Tom roared, a sound of pure animal despair. He stumbled onto the porch, his rifle in his hand. The cattle, the rest of the herd. Stay here, Martha screamed, pushing him back. Your leg, you cannot. They are burning, he yelled, trying to fight her. I will go, she said. Ben, bolt the door after me and do not open it until I come back. She grabbed a heavy axe from the woodpile and ran. The heat hit her like a fist. The main barn was already a lost cause, a towering inferno, the roof caving in, but the smaller holding pen, where he kept his last 24 head, was just catching. She hacked at the gate latch, the wood hot, blistering her hands. She heard a shout, and for a second she thought it was Tom. It was Red Hawk. He was on his horse, appearing as if from the smoke itself. He had no axe, he had a rope. He looped it around the gate post, tied it to his saddle horn, and spurred his horse. The gate ripped from its hinges. Ha! He yelled, riding into the pen, his voice a sharp command. Martha ran in after him, waving her arms, screaming at the terrified, bellowing cattle. They were mad with fear, running in circles. Together, the two of them, the Lakota warrior and the widow, drove the small, terrified herd out of the burning pen and into the far pasture. They managed to save most of them, perhaps half the remaining herd. The rest, in the main barn, were lost. They stood, panting, covered in soot, the night ringing with the roar of the fire and the screams of dying animals. The barn collapsed in on itself, sending a volcano of sparks into the dark sky. Kincaid, Martha whispered, the word tasting like ash. This was his answer. Red Hawk nodded grimly. He pointed to the ground. Near the burning pen, there were fresh hoof prints and a set of boot tracks, already melting in the heat. As the flames died down, Martha walked the perimeter, her heart a cold, hard knot. She saw something glinting in the snow, near where the men had stood. It was metal. She kicked at it with her boot. It was an iron, a branding iron, but it was not Tom's G brand. She picked it up, using her apron to protect her hands from the heat. She held it up to the dying light of the fire. It was not a letter. It was a symbol, a crude, newly forged drawing of a bison, with 2 crossed arrows. The symbol Red Hawk had carved on her fence post. They did not just burn the barn, she said, her voice shaking with a cold, pure rage. They were going to brand the cattle that ran off. They were going to leave this. They were going to blame you. Red Hawk looked at the iron. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were like hot coals. Tom, Martha said, running back to the house, the heavy iron in her hand. Tom, I know what we have to do. We are not going to fight them. We are going to expose them. She burst into the house. Tom was there, rifle across his lap. Ben was silent in the corner. She slammed the forged brand on the table. They left this to frame Red Hawk. Tom looked at the brand, at his wife-to-be, covered in soot and fury, and at the Lakota warrior who stood in his doorway. The railroad warehouse, Martha said, her mind working fast. You said Kincaid keeps his supplies there. That is where a thing like this would be made. That is where the proof is. Tom Garrison looked at the iron. He looked at Red Hawk. He looked at Martha. He had his partners. Get some sleep, he said, his voice quiet. We have a busy night tomorrow. The air was so cold it felt thin, a poor thing to breathe. The moon was a ghost, hidden behind a high sheet of ice in the atmosphere. It was a night for murder, not for theft. They moved as 3 separate pains. Tom was a dull, angry throb. His bad leg and the crutch a clumsy percussion on the frozen ground. He was their lookout, a joke, a man who could not run. Red Hawk was a blade, a shadow that cut through the darkness, moving ahead with a silence that was not human. Martha was the pulse. She carried the storm lantern. Its metal sides shuddered to cast only a single, trembling beam on the ground before her, her heart a frantic, muffled drum against her ribs. The railroad warehouse was a long, low, black shape, like a dead animal fallen by the tracks. It smelled of cold iron, coal smoke, and the sharp, chemical smell of progress. Red Hawk did not lead them to the obvious. Heavy doors. He led them along the foundation, to a drainage space beneath the loading platform. It was a black, low opening, barely 2 feet high. "Here," he whispered. Red Hawk went first, sliding on his belly. Martha looked at Tom. He gave a grim, hopeless shake of his head. He could never make it. "Go," he growled. "I will watch the door. If I cannot run, I can at least yell." "No," Martha said, her voice firm. "We are all in, or we are all out. You are the crutch, the diversion. Red Hawk, find another way." Red Hawk was already back. He had not argued. He simply pointed, 20 yards down, a coal chute, its door hanging by one hinge. It was a tight, filthy squeeze. Red Hawk lowered Tom down, an agonizing, grunt-filled descent as his splinted leg bashed against the metal. Martha followed, landing lightly. They were in the cellar, a black, cold space that smelled of coal dust and rat droppings. A narrow set of stairs led up. Red Hawk went first. He put his hand on the door, then paused. He held up 2 fingers. 2 men. Inside. He held up a hand. Wait. They heard the heavy scrape of a crate, a muffled curse, and then the sound of the main warehouse doors sliding open, then shut. Red Hawk nodded. They were gone. He pushed the door open. The warehouse was vast, a cavern of shadows. Crates were stacked to the high rafters, sacks of feed, barrels of oil, heavy, dark shapes of machinery. In the far corner, a small, pot-bellied stove glowed, casting a dull red circle on the floor. Near it was a workbench and a forge. They moved toward it. The forge was cold, but the anvil was not. On it sat a branding iron, new, the handle barely cool. Martha held the shuttered lantern, opening it just a crack. The light fell on the metal, a bison, 2 crossed arrows, a perfect match for the one she had found at the burned barn. "We have it," Martha whispered. "Proof of nothing," Tom said, his voice a low growl of pain. He leaned heavily on his crutch. "He will say it is a tool he made for the Lakota, a gift. We need paper. We need his name on it." His eyes went to the small, glass-walled office that stood in the corner. Red Hawk tested the door. It was locked. He did not bother with the lock. He wrapped his hand in a piece of burlap, and with a short, sharp jab, he broke the glass pane next to the knob. He reached inside, turned the latch, and opened the door. They slipped inside. The office was small, filled with the scent of stale cigar smoke and ink. A large, leather-bound ledger sat open on the desk. Martha opened the lantern wide, flooding the small space with yellow light. Tom's finger ran down the page, his lips moving. "Here, 2 5 pounds rolled iron, build 2, track maintenance, oil, 10 barrels, build 2, surveyor's supplies. That's kerosene. Martha, enough to burn every barn in this valley." "Tom, look." Martha's voice was different, tense. She had unrolled a map from the corner of the desk. It was not the simple survey Kincaid had shown in the church. This one was marked in detail, with red ink. The line of the railroad was drawn thick. It did not just cross the creek. It went directly, deliberately, through the patch of land marked in small print Lakota burial mounds. In the margin, a handwritten note, "Clear all markers. Priority. O'Doyle to handle any local resistance." "He is not just stealing water," Tom whispered, his face ashen. "He is robbing their graves. He is trying to start a war. He wants the Lakota to fight so he can bring in the cavalry and claim it all. He is a monster, Martha breathed. Well, 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 a voice boomed from behind them, a voice that was pure, jovial malice. I always knew you were smart. Garrison, just not smart enough. They spun. Sheriff O'Doyle filled the office doorway, a shotgun held level at his hip. He was not alone. Two hard-looking men, Kincaid's hired guns, flanked him. O'Doyle's smile was wide and wet. Trespassing, O'Doyle said, tisking, breaking and entering, and theft of private railroad property. His eyes fell on the map, the ledger, the branding iron. My, you have been busy. This is very bad. This makes things simple. He nodded to his men. It is a tragedy. A rancher, his new woman, and a renegade Indian, burned to death while trying to rob the railroad. A fitting end. Red Hawk had not moved. He stood still as a stone, his eyes on O'Doyle. Put the lantern on the desk, ma'am, O'Doyle said, nice and slow. Martha did. The light illuminated the four men. Now, Tom, Red Hawk exploded. He did not attack. He reacted. He grabbed the heavy desk and shoved it, with all his strength, at the men. Scatter, Tom roared. The desk crashed into O'Doyle's legs. The ledger, the map, the lantern, all went flying. The lantern hit the floor, its glass shattering, the lit wick falling into the pool of spilled kerosene from the broken lamp. Get them! O'Doyle screamed, as flames whooshed up between them. The shotgun blasted, the sound deafening in the warehouse. Buckshot ripped through the air where Tom had been. Out! Martha screamed, grabbing Tom's arm. They scrambled from the office, Tom swinging his crutch like a club. Catching one of the hired men in the knee, Red Hawk was already a shadow, vanished among the towering crates. The chute, it is a trap, Tom gasped. The platform, Martha yelled, pulling him toward the massive sliding door. They burst out onto the loading dock. The air was like a slap of ice. A line of dark, silent cattle cars sat on the track. Stop, or I shoot! O'Doyle was right behind them, limping. He raised the shotgun. A shot cracked, sharp and high. Not from O'Doyle, from the roof. Red Hawk was perched on top of a cattle car, rifle in hand. He had not shot at O'Doyle. He shot above him, at the large oil lamp that lit the platform. It exploded in a shower of glass and burning oil, plunging the platform into near total darkness, lit only by the growing fire inside the warehouse. Go, Red Hawk's voice. Run, Tom, Martha pleaded, hauling on his arm. I am trying, he grunted. His crutch was a liability on the icy planks. He slipped. He went down hard, his splinted leg twisting beneath him. A raw cry of pain was ripped from his throat. Tom, he had fallen at the very edge of the platform. He was half on, half off, his splinted leg trapped, his good leg kicking, trying to find purchase. His crutch had slid away, clattering onto the tracks below. I am caught, he yelled, his voice thin with panic. O'Doyle was coming, a large dark shape, reloading. And then a sound, a deep metallic groan, a clank, clank, clank. The cattle cars. They were not parked. They were being moved. A switch engine, unseen, was shunting them. The massive, black wheels just inches from Tom's head began to turn. Martha, he roared, his voice pure terror. No, she screamed. She was not a widow. She would not be a widow. She grabbed the front of his heavy coat with both hands. She braced her boots on the icy planks. You are not dying. You are not leaving me. The wheels scraped. Tom's body was being pulled, dragged toward the gap. She pulled. She pulled with the memory of her husband's cold hand. She pulled with the fury of the burned barn. She pulled with the strength of the woman who had set a broken bone in a blizzard. Get up, she screamed. with a sound of tearing fabric and a sickening pop. His leg came free. She hauled him backward, onto the platform, his dead weight landing on top of her. They rolled, gasping, as the enormous, indifferent iron wheels ground past the spot where his head had been. She was shaking, sobbing, unable to breathe. He was groaning, his face a mask of agony. A shadow fell over them. O'Doyle. He had them. He raised the shotgun. The twin black holes of the barrel pointed at their heads. A shape launched itself from the roof of the moving train. A silent, dark eagle. Red Hawk landed square on O'Doyle's back. The shotgun fired into the air. A deafening blast. The two men went down, rolling, a tangle of limbs and fury. "Now!" Red Hawk yelled, his voice strained. He had his knife. O'Doyle had his bulk. "My horse at the canyon, go!" Martha scrambled up. She hauled Tom to his feet, or foot. He was a dead weight. "His leg is broken again. Go!" Red Hawk shoved them. He turned back as the other two hired guns rounded the corner. He was a whirlwind of motion, a distraction, buying them seconds. Martha became the crutch. Tom threw his arm over her shoulder, and she took his full weight. They hopped, stumbled, fell their way off the platform and into the deep snow. It was a nightmare. Each step was a gasp of pain from him, a grunt of exertion from her. They reached the mouth of a dark, narrow canyon. Just as the warehouse fire lit up the sky, Red Hawk's Appaloosa stood waiting, tethered to a pine. It took all her strength to get Tom onto its back. He was nearly unconscious, muttering in pain. "Shack, old hunting shack, up!" She took the reins. The snow was deep, but the storm was rising, the new flakes already covering their tracks. She led the horse up the canyon, into the howling white, leaving the fire and the fight behind. The shack was a half-fallen ruin of logs, but its door was solid. She eased Tom off the horse and dragged him inside. It was dark, a coffin of cold. She found the hearth, a few splintered pieces of wood. She used her flint and steel, her hands shaking so hard she could barely strike a spark. Finally, a small, weak flame caught. She fed it, nurtured it, until a small, smoky fire was going. Tom was shivering violently, his face gray. "The leg!" She looked. It was bad. The splints were shattered, the leg swelling, dark and unnatural. "I have to," she began, but she had no splints, no bandages. "Just let me," he whispered. Just for a minute. They sat in the ringing silence, broken only by the shriek of the wind outside. The storm was here. They were trapped. "My husband," Martha said, her voice flat, talking to the fire. "His name was John. He died of a fever, back in the Dakotas." Tom was watching her, his eyes clouded with pain, but listening. "He was not a strong man," she said, feeding a stick to the flame. "He was kind, but he was weak. He gave up. When the fever came, he just let it take him. I sat with him for 2 days. He was burning, and then he was cold. So cold." She wrapped her arms around herself. "When I buried him, I swore I would never be that cold again. I would never be that helpless. I would never lose someone like that again." She turned to look at him, her eyes bright with tears she would not shed. "When I saw you on the platform, with those wheels, all I could think was, not again. I will not be a widow twice." Tom reached out, his hand grasping hers. His skin was rough, calloused, but his touch was surprisingly gentle. "Martha," he said, his voice a rasp. "The first night," he breathed, the words costing him. When I said that thing, about my bed, the job." She looked at their joined hands. "I was a fool," he said. "A coward. When Mary died, the light went out, the house, Ben, me, we were just empty. And I was so afraid, so alone. Then you showed up, And you were alive. You were strong. And I hated you for it. I wanted to hurt you. I wanted to see if you would break, like I was breaking." He squeezed her hand. "You did not break. You came in, and you lit the fire. You saved my boy. You saved me. Tonight, you saved me." He looked at her, his gaze clear and full of a terrible, painful honesty. "This is not a bargain. Not anymore. I do not want a wife in my bed. I want to start over. If you will have me, a broken man, with a broken leg, and a burned-down barn. But I am asking, this time, I am asking." The door of the shack cracked open, letting in a swirl of snow. Red Hawk stood in the doorway. He was covered in snow, a long, bleeding gash on his cheek. But he was alive. He carried a fresh-killed rabbit by the feet. He stepped inside, letting the door fall shut. He looked at Tom's leg. He looked at Martha's face. He looked at their clasped hands. He did not say a word. He went to the fire, drew his knife, and began to skin the rabbit with practiced, economical motions. "Oh, Doyle," Tom asked, his voice strained. "He is cold," Red Hawk said, not looking up. "He went back to town. He will tell Kincaid we are lost in the storm. He thinks the snow will do his job for him." He looked up then, his black eyes moving from Tom to Martha, and back. "You speak of freedom," he said, his voice quiet, a rumble in the small hut. "You think freedom is a deed, a fence. You think it is being left alone." He held up the sharp, clean blade of his knife. "Freedom is not being alone," he said. "Freedom is knowing who to stand with, knowing how to walk together, how to face the wind and not bow your head." He pointed the knife at the rabbit. "We eat, we rest. Tomorrow, we go to your town, and we do not bow." The shack was an island of frail timber in a screaming ocean of white. The wind did not howl. It was a physical, pressing weight against the thin walls. Inside, the small fire ate its wood with a desperate hunger, casting wild, dancing shadows that made the small space seem to bleed at the edges. Red Hawk was a block of granite by the door, unmoving, his buffalo robe making him a part of the landscape. He had reset Tom's leg again, a brutal, efficient act that had left Tom pale and shimmering with sweat. Now, the fever was rising. The new break, the cold, the exhaustion, all of it was settling in. Tom was shivering violently, his teeth chattering in a rhythm that was against nature. "He needs heat," Red Hawk said, his voice a low rumble under the wind. He turned, his gaze falling on Martha. "The fire is not enough." Martha knew what he meant. She was already cold. But Tom was freezing from the inside out. His life was guttering. I cannot," she whispered, the shame of the thought a hot flush. Red Hawk's gaze was not judgmental. It was practical. "He will die, as your first man died." The words were a flat, cold blade, but they cut through her fear. He was right. This was not a choice. It was a chore. It was life. Tom groaned, a low, delirious sound. "Mary, so cold." "I am here," Martha said, her voice sharp, trying to pierce his fog. "It is Martha." She looked at Red Hawk. He took his own heavy buffalo robe, the one he had been sitting on, and threw it over the rough cot. "You have body heat. He has none. Share it, or bury him." He turned his back to them then, a solid, final gesture, and resumed his watch at the door, giving them the only privacy the world had left. Martha took a deep breath. She unlaced her boots. She lay down on the cot, her back to Tom, but his shivers were so violent they shook the small frame. It was not enough. "Damn it!" she swore, a word that felt like tearing cloth. She turned. She faced him. She pushed herself against his back, wrapping her arms around his chest, her legs against his. He was a block of ice, rigid with shivers. "Tom," she said, her own voice shaking, You have to stop fighting me. You have to let me in." He groaned, but his body, unconsciously, seemed to lean into her. She pressed her face between his shoulder blades, her own shivers beginning, and held on, as if she could force her own life into him. For an hour, they lay like that, a tangle of misery in the dark. The fever grew. He began to talk. "The wheels. Martha saw the wheels." "I am here," she whispered, her lips against his rough shirt. "The wheels are gone. You are safe." "Not safe," he muttered, his body suddenly going rigid. "I am a cripple, a burden. You pulled me like a sack, like feed." His fear was so naked, so raw, it stole her breath. He was not afraid of death. He was afraid of being weak. "You are a man," she said, her voice fierce. "You are a man who stood up in a church. You are a man who tried to save his herd. You are not a sack of feed." "Broken," he whispered. "Barn is gone. Herd is gone. I have nothing to offer. The bargain is void." Her anger was sudden and hot. "The bargain. You think that is what this is? You think I pulled you from under a train for a bargain?" She pushed him, rolling him onto his back. She leaned over him, her face close to his in the dim, flickering light. He was pale, his eyes bright with fever, but he was looking at her. He was seeing her. "Listen to me, Tom Garrison," she said, her voice low and shaking with a force she did not know she possessed. "I am done with bargains. I am done with jobs. I buried one husband who gave up. I will not be yoked to another. If we walk out of this shack, if we live, the old terms are dead." His eyes held hers. "What terms, then?" "Partners," she said, the word like a stone dropped in a deep well. "Equal, not your servant, not your woman's hand. My voice, in this house, with the boy, with the land, it will be equal to yours. I will not be silent. I will not be your protection. I will be your partner, or you can let this fever take you. I do not care, but I will not be a widow's shadow again." He looked at her for a long time. The wind screamed, as if trying to tear the shack apart. His breathing was shallow. He was tired. He was broken. "You ask," he rasped, "for a lot from a man with nothing." "I am asking," she said, her voice softening, "for you to not be the man with nothing. I am asking for you to be the man who stood up on his crutch. That man. I need that man. Ben needs him." A single hot tear escaped the corner of his eye and rolled into his hair. He reached up, his hand rough, calloused, hot with fever. He touched her cheek. "You are a fire, Martha," he whispered. "You burn the cold away." "Then promise me," she pressed. "Promise me, equal." He closed his eyes, a tremor running through him. I promise to listen, to trust, to share the land, the boy, all of it, equal." The promise hung in the air, a living thing. The tension in her body broke. She slumped, her forehead resting against his. The fight was gone. There was only the sound of their breathing and the wind. He was still shivering, but less. His hand was still on her cheek. She was cold, so cold. She leaned into his touch. He turned his head, a slight, pained motion, and his lips, dry and cracked, brushed the palm of her hand. It was a surrender. It was a plea. "Martha," he whispered, his voice no longer delirious, but a clear, thin thread of sound. She looked at him. At this man, this impossible, broken, proud man. She lowered her head, slowly. She was not accepting a bargain. She was sealing a vow. Her lips touched his. It was a hesitant, gentle thing, not a kiss of passion, but of discovery. He tasted of coffee and fever and a desperate, weary loneliness. He did not pull her closer. He could not. He simply received her. He kissed her back, a pressure that was a question, and a promise. She felt his heart thudding against her ribs. It was no longer a frantic, fevered beat. It was a steady, strong rhythm. It was a heart that was deciding to fight. She pulled back, just enough to see his face. His eyes were closed. The lines of pain around his mouth had softened. She lay her head on his chest, her ear over that new, steady beat. She pulled the heavy buffalo robe over both of them. He was still hot, but it was a different heat now. It was a human warmth. She closed her eyes. The fire in the hearth was low, the embers glowing a deep, steady red, pulsing in the dark. The wind could not touch them. The gray light of morning felt like an intrusion. The shack was still. The storm had passed. Martha woke first. She was still pressed against Tom. His fever had broken. He was sleeping, a deep, healing sleep, his breathing even. She was stiff and cold, but she was alive. Red Hawk was gone from the door. She sat up, her movements slow, trying not to wake Tom. The door was open a crack. She stood, her legs aching, and walked outside. The world was a miracle. A blinding, pristine white. The sky was a sharp, clear blue. Red Hawk was there, his Appaloosa digging in the snow for buried grass. He was looking east, toward the rising sun. "He will live," he said, without turning. "Yes," Martha said. "His fever broke." Red Hawk pointed. "Men are moving. 4, maybe 5. They ride from Kincaid's land. They carry stakes. They ride for the burial ground." Martha's blood went cold. "He is not waiting. He is staking his claim. He thinks the storm hid his work." Red Hawk said, "He thinks you are dead. He will have the land staked and registered before the judge hears of any trouble." Tom's voice came from the doorway, weak but clear. "He is wrong." He was leaning on the doorframe, a makeshift crutch, a thick branch, under one arm. He looked like a ghost, but his eyes were alive. "He is wrong," he said again. "We have to stop him," Martha said. Her mind was already working. "We cannot ride to the district court, but the mail train can—" She went back inside, retrieved her satchel. She had a small amount of paper, a pencil. She knelt on the floor, using the cot as a desk. "I am writing to Judge Alastair," she said, her pencil flying. "I am telling him everything, the ledger, the map, the forged brand, the fire, the attack at the warehouse. I am telling him Kincaid is trying to start an Indian war to cover his theft." She finished, her handwriting clear and strong. She folded it. "Tom, you and I, we go back to the ranch. Red Hawk—" "I will go to the burial ground," he said. "I will not let them break the earth. I will slow them, but I will not start the fight. Kincaid needs witnesses to see his shame." He swung onto his horse. "Gather your neighbors. Garrison, bring them. Bring them all. Kincaid wants a crowd. Give him one." He was gone, a silent wraith against the snow. The ride back was a slow, agonizing torment. Martha got Tom onto the horse, and she led it, walking, her boots breaking the fresh crust of snow. They crested the final rise. The house stood. The barn was a black, skeletal ruin, a cold, smoking wound in the white snow. "Ben," Tom breathed, his voice tight. Martha ran to the door. It was still bolted, as she had commanded. "Ben!" she yelled, banging on it. "Ben, it is Martha. We are home." A frantic scraping sound from inside. The bolt slid back. The door opened. Ben stood there. He was wrapped in every blanket in the house, his face streaked with soot and tears. The wooden horse clutched in his hand. He had been alone, for a day and a night, listening to the storm, staring at the ruins of the barn. He looked at Tom, broken and pale on the horse. He looked at Martha, her face raw from the cold, her hair wild. He did not run. He just stood, his small body shaking, the silence of a year trapped in his throat. Martha slid to her knees. She held out her arms. "Ben, we are here. I told you I would come back." He took one step, then another. He looked at her, his eyes wide, as if seeing her for the first time. He ran. He buried his face in her coat, his small arms locking around her neck, his body a knot of released terror. She held him, her own tears finally breaking, freezing on her cheeks. "I am here. I am here." He pulled his head back, his small face a mess of grief and relief. He looked at her. He struggled, as if a great, rusted lock was breaking in his chest. He took a ragged, sobbing breath. "Mother," he whispered. The word was a rusty hinge, a miracle. Martha stopped breathing. She held him, rocking him, as the tears came, washing away the soot. Tom slid from the horse, his bad leg collapsing, but he did not care. He leaned against the horse, his own face wet, watching the woman and the boy. After a long time, Martha stood, Ben still clinging to her. She looked at Tom. His gaze was full of a love, a respect, a pride that was so potent it was almost a physical thing. "We have work to do," she said, her voice thick but steady. They assembled the neighbors. It was a grim parade. Martha rode her horse, Ben in the saddle in front of her. Tom sat in the wagon, his leg propped, his rifle across his lap. They went to Johnson's. They went to the others. "Kincaid is at the burial ground," Martha said. "He is staking the land. Red Hawk is there. We are going. We need witnesses." They gathered, a small, cold, angry crowd. In the yard by Tom's ruined barn, they were only 6 families, with a handful of ranch hands. Tom pulled himself up, using the wagon wheel for support. He stood, his legs straight, his face pale, but his voice strong. He took Martha's hand, who was still holding Ben. "My friends," he said, his voice carrying in the cold, clear air. "You all know me. You know what I have lost." He nodded at the barn. "Kincaid thinks he has beaten me. He thinks he has beaten us." He held up Martha's hand. 2 weeks ago, Sheriff O'Doyle came to my house. He insulted this woman. To protect her, to protect my home. I told him she was my intended. He looked at the crowd, his gaze unwavering. It was a lie. It was a lie born of desperation, to keep a bully at bay. He paused, and his grip tightened on Martha's hand. He looked at her, and his voice, when he spoke again, was full. "I am standing here today, before God and all of you, to make that lie the truth. This is my wife. This is Martha Garrison. Not for a piece of paper, not for a reputation. She is my wife. For this house, for my son." He choked on the word. "And for my heart, we are riding to the burial ground. Who is riding with the Garrisons?" Bill Johnson was the first. He touched his hat. "I am Tom." One by one, the others nodded. An army of broken ranchers, led by a crippled man, a widow, and a small boy who had just found his voice. The burial ground was a place of deep, wind-scoured silence. It was not a grand cemetery, just a series of low, grassy mounds on a rise overlooking the creek, each marked with stones or a simple, carved wooden pole. But to the Lakota, it was the most sacred ground in the valley, the place where the ancestors slept and watched. Silas Kincaid saw only wasted pasture. He arrived with a team of 12 men. They were not ranchers. They were hard-faced men who worked for the railroad, carrying heavy wooden stakes, mallets, and hand plows to break the frozen earth. With them was Sheriff O'Doyle, his face a mask of smug authority. His right hand, Martha noted, wrapped in a heavy bandage from the fight at the warehouse. He had not gone back to town. He had hidden and waited. O'Doyle unrolled a scroll. By authority of the Nebraska-Wyoming Railroad Commission and the Territorial Office, he boomed, his voice too loud for the space. I am ordered to protect this survey team. This land is hereby claimed for public progress. Any interference will be met with force. It was a lie. A piece of paper Kincaid had probably written himself, but it sounded official. Kincaid's men advanced, their plows ready, but they stopped. Standing between them and the graves was a silent line. Red Hawk was there, his arms folded, his rifle on his back, his face like carved stone. With him were 10 other Lakota warriors, his fellows. They carried no rifles. They held only slender poles, from which fluttered small flags of red and blue cloth, prayer flags. They did not speak. They did not threaten. They simply stood, a living, silent circle, guarding their dead. Kincaid sneered. I gave you a chance to move. Red Hawk, get these trinkets and your men off my property. Red Hawk did not move. O'Doyle. Kincaid snapped. Clear them. O'Doyle looked at the silent, impassive line of warriors, then at his own men. He licked his lips. This was exactly the confrontation Kincaid wanted. A fight, blood, an excuse for a massacre that would bring in the cavalry. This is your last warning, O'Doyle shouted, his hand moving to the new pistol at his hip. That is enough. Sheriff, a new voice called out. Kincaid and O'Doyle spun. Up the rise, coming from the Garrison Ranch, was a second army. It was a pathetic, strange-looking force. Tom Garrison, sitting in the wagon, his bad leg propped on a sack, his face pale but set, his rifle across his lap. Martha, on her gelding, with Ben sitting in front of her, his small arms wrapped around her waist. Behind them, Bill Johnson on his mule, Pastor Miles in his dark coat, and every rancher in hand who had agreed to ride. They were 4 wagons and perhaps 10 riders. They were outnumbered, but they were there. They formed a second line, a crescent of wagons and horses, behind Kincaid's men. Kincaid was now trapped between the silent Lakota and the grim-faced ranchers. Garrison, Kincaid spat, his face flushing with rage. I heard the storm got you. A pity. You are trespassing. No, Kincaid, Tom said, his voice clear in the cold air. You are. This is not your land. It never was. It is, by law, O'Doyle yelled, waving his fake writ. And I have the paper to prove it. And I, a voice said, have this. A new rider. He was not with the ranchers. He was on a lathered, winded horse, a mail horse. He wore the blue coat of the United States Postal Service. He rode straight past Kincaid, ignoring him, and stopped in front of Pastor Miles. Pastor. The rider gasped. I was told to find you. A letter from Judge Allister, from the district court. He said it was urgent. It is a writ. He handed the sealed, official envelope to the pastor. O'Doyle's face went white. Pastor Miles broke the wax seal. He put on his spectacles. He read the document, his hands shaking, and then a great, slow smile of profound relief spread across his face. He has done it, the pastor whispered. He turned to the crowd, his voice ringing with a newfound authority. This is a legal, binding writ of injunction from the district court, having received credible, sworn testimony from Mrs. Martha Henley regarding a conspiracy. The judge hereby orders an immediate halt to all railroad activity in this valley, pending a full investigation into fraud, arson, willful destruction of property, and conspiracy to incite violence with the Lakota people. A roar went up from the ranchers. Kincaid's face was a study in apoplexy. He was, for the first time, speechless. The law has spoken, Mr. Kincaid, Pastor Miles said, holding the paper aloft. Your work here is done. Kincaid looked at the ranchers. He looked at the Lakota. He looked at the paper that had just ruined him, and he snapped. The law, he screamed, his voice a raw, ugly tear in the air. I am the law. That is my land. Those are my tracks. He turned to his men, his face purple. To hell with the judge. Tear those damn sticks down. Plow those graves. His men hesitated, looking at the ranchers, at the official writ. Move! Kincaid shrieked. He grabbed a prayer flag from the ground and ripped it in two. No, Tom Garrison said. He had, somehow, gotten himself out of the wagon. He was standing on his one good leg, using his crutch, his body shaking with the effort. He hobbled forward, planting himself between Kincaid and the graves. This land belongs to God. Kincaid, Tom said, his voice low and steady. And you are trespassing. Kincaid looked at the crippled man who stood in his way. He smiled. A slow, ugly smile. You, Garrison, you are going to stop me. He is not alone, Martha said, her horse walking forward. Kincaid's eyes went to O'Doyle. He gave a slight, sharp nod. Finish it. O'Doyle saw his chance. Authority was gone. The law was against him. But a bullet could solve everything. If Garrison was dead, if the Lakota were provoked, the chaos would cover all. He drew his new pistol. He aimed it, not at Red Hawk, but straight at Tom Garrison's chest. You are under arrest. Garrison for interfering with a... He never finished. Ben, sitting on the horse with Martha, saw the gun. He was holding a small, brass sheep bell that Martha had given him to hold. Something to grip, something to keep his hands from freezing. He saw the gun. He saw his father. He did not scream. He did not speak. He shook the bell. A sharp, frantic jing-jing-jing-jing cut the air. It was such a small, strange sound. It made O'Doyle flinch, his eyes darting to the boy. It was a fractional, fatal hesitation. Crack! The rifle shot was a single, perfect note. It did not come from the ranchers. It came from a high ridge, 200 yards away. O'Doyle screamed, a high, thin sound. His pistol, its wooden grip shattered, spun from a hand that was suddenly a red ruin, and landed in the snow. Red Hawk, his rifle already lowered, stood on the ridge, a silent sentinel. He had not killed, he had disarmed. He had avoided the war. O'Doyle stumbled back, clutching his shattered hand, his face a mask of white-hot agony. Kincaid's men, seeing their leader disarmed by a ghost on a hill, seeing the law, the ranchers, and God himself allied against them, threw down their tools. It was over. And then, the ranchers did not cheer. They did not attack. Led by Bill Johnson, they moved. They walked, slowly, deliberately, until they had formed a wide, silent circle around Kincaid, O'Doyle, and their now useless men. They were not a mob. They were a jury. They were witnesses. Martha dismounted. She took Ben's hand, and the two of them walked into the center of that circle. In her other hand, she held the forged bison head branding iron. She walked up to Silas Kincaid. You wanted to blame them, did you not? She said, her voice clear, carrying to every person. You burned my barn, you stole our cattle, and you left this... She held up the iron. You made this in your warehouse. You were going to brand the cattle and blame Red Hawk, to start a war, to clear the land. That is a lie, Kincaid blustered, but his eyes were on the iron. Is it? Martha said, and she pulled a single, folded, singed piece of paper from her coat. It was the ledger page. Because you were so clumsy as to order the iron, and the 10 barrels of kerosene, and the felling axes, all on the same page. A page that also has your signature, authorizing the expedited clearing of the burial grounds. Kincaid's eyes bulged. He had just admitted, in front of everyone, that it was his ledger. He had just confirmed the evidence. He, in his rage, had trapped himself. He was cornered, beaten, and so he fell back on the only thing he had left, hatred. He turned, his face a contorted mask of pure, ugly spite. He looked past Martha, past Tom to Red Hawk, who was now walking down the ridge to join them. "You!" Kincaid screamed, his voice cracking. "You filthy, godless savage! This is my country. This is a white man's country. I built this. I brought the civilization. And you are nothing. You are dirt. You are a dead, buried relic. And so are your ancestors. I will plow these graves. I will build my railroad. And you will. He stopped. No one was listening. His own men were looking at the ground, ashamed. The ranchers were staring at him with a cold, profound disgust. Even O'Doyle, clutching his bleeding hand, was looking away. Kincaid's violence, his guns, his fire, none of it had been as damaging as his own words. He had shown them his soul, and it was rotten. He had not been defeated by bullets. He had been defeated by a judge's piece of paper, a woman's courage, a small boy's bell, and the united silent judgment of a community. Tom Garrison hobbled forward. He stood next to his wife. He did not look at Kincaid. He looked at Red Hawk. "Thank you, friend," Tom said. Red Hawk looked at Tom, and at Martha, and at Ben. He gave a single, slow nod. The siege was broken. The war was over. The victory at the burial ground was not followed by cheers. It was followed by a deep, weary, and uncertain silence. The ranchers, Kincaid's men, and the Lakota all looked at each other in the cold, bright sunlight, the fractured pistol lying in the snow between them. The stalemate was broken by Pastor Miles. He walked, holding the judge's writ, and stood beside the moaning Sheriff O'Doyle. "Bill," he said to Johnson, "help me get the sheriff onto his horse. He needs a doctor. The rest of you men," he said to Kincaid's crew, "your work here is finished. Go home." Silas Kincaid himself was a statue of fury. He watched his men melt away, eager to be free of his failed enterprise. He looked at Tom, at Martha, at Red Hawk. His face promised murder, but his power was gone. He said nothing. He simply climbed onto his horse, turned it, and rode east, toward the railroad he loved more than people. He did not look back. Within a week, the valley was transformed. Judge Allister arrived, not with the slow pace of a politician, but with the swiftness of 2 federal marshals. He was a small, dry man with eyes that missed nothing. He had Martha's letter in his breast pocket. He did not just visit, he acted. The railroad warehouse was padlocked, a federal seal placed on its door, a young marshal left to guard it. The ledger, the map, and the forged branding iron were taken as evidence. Sheriff O'Doyle, his hand crudely splinted by a doctor, was stripped of his badge. The judge interviewed him for an hour, and when O'Doyle emerged, he was a gray, broken man under investigation and facing charges. As for Kincaid, he was gone. Some said he had fled to Omaha. Others said he was on a train to Washington to plead his case. It did not matter. He was gone. His name a curse. The true work began 2 days later, in the church, which was still the post office. It was not a religious service. It was a constitutional convention. Pastor Miles sat at the head of the table, a fresh pot of ink and a clean sheet of paper before him. Tom was there, his leg propped on a stool, his face still pale but his eyes clear. Martha sat beside him, not behind him. Bill Johnson and 2 other ranchers represented the homesteaders, and, in the seat of honor, a place he accepted with quiet dignity, sat Red Hawk. They called it the local covenant. It was not a legal document in the eyes of the state, but it was law in the valley. "First," Tom said, his voice quiet but firm, "the water. The creek belongs to the land. We all drink from it. We will share it. No man shall dam it or divert it without the consent of all." Pastor Miles wrote, his quill scratching. Second, Red Hawk spoke, and the pastor translated, though most of the men now understood his intent. "The bison, they are our food. The graves, they are our memory. Martha spoke, her voice finding the words for them. The ranchers pledged to never again hunt the bison for sport or waste, only for need. We will respect the herds. She looked at Red Hawk. And the burial ground, and all such grounds, are to be held sacred. They will not be plowed. They will not be fenced. They will be protected. It was written. Third, Tom said. The railroad. The judge has confirmed the injunction. The route will be moved south, to the hills. It will cost them more, but it will not cut our water or cross their graves. A new line was drawn on a new map. When it was done, all the men stood. Pastor Miles, Tom, Johnson, the others. They signed their names. Red Hawk did not sign. He stepped outside, brought in a handful of creek mud, and pressed his hand, clear and perfect, to the bottom of the page. The covenant was sealed. The following Monday, a strange sight appeared on the Garrison Ranch. A dozen Lakota men, including Red Hawk, rode into the yard. They did not carry weapons. They carried ropes and axes. They were followed by Bill Johnson's wagon and the wagons of the other ranchers. Tom, leaning on his crutch, met them at the ruin of his barn. "You have no barn," Red Hawk said, a simple statement. "No," Tom agreed. "We have hands." Red Hawk said, "You have wood on your land. We will build. You will feed." It was an exchange of labor, a trade of dignity. For a week, the valley rang with the sound of axes. The ranchers, who knew carpentry, set the posts and framed the roof. The Lakota, strong and tireless, hauled the logs, their muscles working in a rhythm that was all their own. Martha's kitchen became a field headquarters. She baked until her arms ached, her flour, now supplemented by supplies from Johnson, turning into mountains of biscuits and flapjacks. She and the other ranchers' wives kept a massive pot of beans and bacon bubbling over an open fire. They ate together, sitting on the cold ground, the white men and the red, not as friends, not yet, but as neighbors, bound by a common enemy and a shared work. The house itself was healing. The silence that had once defined it was gone. Ben was the center of that new sound. He had found his voice, and though it was small and sometimes hesitant, he used it. He asked questions. "Father, is your leg hurting? Mother, is the fire too hot?" Tom's ledger, which he kept by his chair, began to change. He still had the long, red-inked columns of debt, but the news of the spring, of new calves from the herd Martha and Red Hawk had saved, allowed him to make small, new entries in black. The herd was small, but it was his, and it was growing. The red lines were not gone, but they were no longer the only color on the page. One evening, as the sun set, casting a pink glow on the snow, Ben was sitting by the hearth. He was quiet, concentrating. He had been carrying the small wooden horse with him everywhere, a constant, silent companion. Martha was mending Tom's shirt. Tom was studying his ledger. Ben stood up. He walked to the mantelpiece, the one above the fire Martha had lit, the one where she had first placed his toy when she arrived. He looked at the horse in his hand. He rubbed his thumb over its worn, carved head. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, he placed the horse on the mantel. He did not leave it in the ashes, a relic of grief. He did not clutch it, a token of fear. He set it down, as a centerpiece, an object of peace. He turned and saw them watching him, a slow smile, the one Martha had seen a glimmer of during the storm, spread across his face. "He can see the whole room from there," Ben said. Tom closed the ledger. He reached out his hand, and Martha put hers in it. The house was breathing again. The community, too, was breathing. Martha, seeing the hunger not just for food but for fellowship, declared her kitchen open every Sunday after Pastor Miles's service. The Garrison Ranch was the new meeting place. It was not a party, it was a gathering. A massive pot of beans was always on. The griddle was always hot. People came. with their own small contributions of coffee, or dried apples, or just their presence. They talked. They shared news. They argued over fences and weather. They were a community again, held together not by fear, but by flapjacks. One cold afternoon, as the first signs of a thaw softened the air, Martha saw Red Hawk by the creek. He was not hunting. He was alone, walking the banks, and he had a leather pouch. He was casting handfuls of something onto the muddy, snow-melted earth. She walked out to him. "What are you doing?" He held out his hand. It was full of seeds. "Grass," he said. "Buffalo grass. Good grass. The hunters, the plows. They scarred the land. The creek will wash it away if it has no roots." He threw another handful. "For the bison," he said. Then he looked at her, and his eyes held the barest hint of a smile. "And for the cattle, they all must eat." He was mending the land, just as they were mending their lives. That evening, Martha was quiet. Tom watched her as she moved about the kitchen, which was finally, truly, her own. "What is on your mind?" he asked. "Tom," she said, stopping, wiping her hands on her apron. We have been living as man and wife, in this house, before the valley, but we are not." He nodded, his face serious. "I know, I have been waiting." "For what?" "For you," he said simply. "For you to be ready. This was a hard road. Martha, I did not want to push. I promised you equality. That includes the choice." She looked at him, at this man who had come so far from the cold, desperate creature at the door. "Pastor Miles is coming for the Sunday kitchen," she said, her voice soft. "He is," Tom agreed. "And Red Hawk will be here, checking the new barn roof." "He will, I think," Martha said, a small, true smile touching her lips. "That is all the witnesses we need. A small wedding. No fuss, just the truth." "The truth," Tom said, his voice thick. He stood, his crutch thumping, and crossed the room. He did not kiss her. He just took her flour-dusted hands in his. "A small wedding, with a pastor. And," he added, "perhaps a blessing from a friend. 2 cultures, under one roof." Martha nodded, her heart so full it ached. Under one roof. The winter did not just break, it yielded. It gave way to a spring of such fierce, sudden life that the entire valley seemed to exhale. The creek, fed by the melting snow, ran high and clear, no longer a point of contention but a shared, bubbling promise. The grass, the native seeds Red Hawk had sown, came up thick and green, a carpet that covered the scars of the hard season. And then came summer. In the first week of June, the sun was no longer a pale, distant hope. It was a warm, possessive hand on the land. It was on such a day so bright it seemed impossible that the world had ever been cold, that the Garrison Ranch prepared for a wedding. It was not a grand affair. Martha had hung strips of an old red blanket and a clean white sheet from the new barn's rafters, the colors bright against the new-cut pine. The yard, once a sea of mud and ice, was now dry and smelled of dust and horses. The smoke from the kitchen chimney was not a thin, desperate wisp, but a hearty, fragrant plume that promised a feast. They came from all over the valley. Bill Johnson and his wife, who brought a jar of pickled preserves. The other ranchers, their faces no longer pinched with fear, but open and ready for a celebration. A few of the railroad men, the surveyors, showed up, their faces awkward, their hands clean. They had been working on the new route, the one that went south, around the hills. They had come to show, in their own way, that the war was over. And the Lakota came. Red Hawk arrived not as a lone warrior, but with his family. His wife, a quiet, strong woman named Bright Star, and their 2 children. They brought not a gift of barter, but a gift of blessing, a bundle of sweetgrass, which they burned. the smoke a clean, sacred scent that mingled with the smell of roasting venison. Tom stood on the porch of the house. He wore a clean shirt. He no longer needed the crutch. His leg had healed, leaving him with only a slight, proud limp. He was a man who had walked through the fire and found he was not alone. Martha came out of the house. She wore a simple blue dress, one she had mended and saved, her hair not in a tight, practical bun, but brushed out, falling over her shoulders. She held a small bunch of wild prairie flowers. Ben, dressed in his own clean, mended clothes, walked beside her, his hand holding hers. Pastor Miles stood before them, his Bible in his hand. Red Hawk and Bright Star stood beside him. There was no white side or Indian side. There was just the gathering. Pastor Miles read from his book, his voice full of a genuine joy. He spoke of new beginnings, of finding family in the wilderness. Then he nodded to Tom. Tom took Martha's hands. He looked at her, not as a desperate rancher, not as a man making a bargain, but as a man seeing his whole world. "Martha," he said, his voice thick, carrying in the warm air. "When you came here, this house was cold. I was cold. I offered you a contract, a piece of paper to keep the world away." He shook his head, a small, pained at the memory gesture. "There is no more cold contract. There is no bargain. There is only a warm partnership, a promise to stand with you, to listen to you, to build with you." He looked at Ben, who was smiling, a wide, true smile. "You gave me back my son. You gave me back my life. I love you, Martha." Martha's eyes were bright, but her voice was steady. She held his rough hands. "Tom, I came here looking for shelter, a place to survive. But this," she said, her other hand reaching out to touch Ben's hair, "is not about surviving. This is about living. You and Ben. You have taught me that home is not a roof. Home is not a pantry. Home is where we stand, and where we choose to protect each other. I choose this. I choose you." Pastor Miles made the blessing. "By the authority of God, and with the witness of this good community, I pronounce you man and wife." The ranchers cheered, a rough, heartfelt sound, but Red Hawk stepped forward. He began to speak, his voice a low, resonant chant. He was not speaking to the pastor. He was speaking to the earth, to the sky. He was asking the ancestors, the ones who slept at the burial ground, to bless this new union, to weave this new, strong thread into the old, sacred blanket of the land. It was a blessing from both worlds. The promises they made that day were not just to each other. They were to the future. After the meal, Tom gathered the ranchers. He unrolled the covenant they had all signed. "The creek is full now," he said, "but the dry season will come. I am pledging 10% of my herd's sale every year to a water fund, to dig a proper well, a deep one, that we all can share. Lakota, rancher, all of us." Bill Johnson clapped him on the shoulder. "We are with you, Tom." Martha, meanwhile, was sitting with Bright Star. Ben was showing her children his wooden horse. "The children," Martha said, "they need more, not just work." Bright Star nodded. "They need to know the stories." "I am going to start a school," Martha said, the idea new, but solid. "In my kitchen, 1 day a week, for Ben, for your children, if you will let them come. For Bill's children, they will learn their numbers, their letters, and," she looked at Bright Star, "they will learn the stories, all of them, yours and ours, together." Bright Star looked at this white woman, and she saw a future. She nodded. Red Hawk had been watching. He had become the man who walked between. The ranchers trusted him. His people respected his wisdom. He was the envoy, the peacemaker, the man who knew that freedom was a harder, more complicated thing than just being left alone. As the afternoon sun began to dip, Ben did something that made Martha's heart stop. He walked up to Red Hawk, who was standing by his Appaloosa, preparing for the ride home. Ben held out his most precious possession, the wooden horse. "Sir," Ben said, his voice clear, He has been on the mantle. He is safe, but he is bored." Red Hawk looked at the small, carved toy. He looked at the boy. "He wants to see the plains," Ben said. "He wants to see the bison. You ride far. Could you take him for a few days, so he can ride with you, so he can be free?" It was an act of such profound, beautiful trust that Tom had to look away. Red Hawk knelt. He was eye level with the boy. He did not smile, but his eyes were kind. "He is a strong horse," Red Hawk said. He took the small toy and tucked it, with great gentle care, into the leather pouch at his belt, the one where he carried his most sacred things. "He will ride with me. He will see the great herds, and I will bring him home to you. He is a good son's horse." Ben's face was a sunbeam. He had given his trust, and it had been accepted with honor. He ran back to his mother, his spirit, at last, as free as the horse he had just let go. That night, the last of the guests were gone. The ranch was quiet. The moon rose, washing the new barn and the old house in a clean, silver light. From the porch, the sound of a mouth harp drifted, a simple, sweet, reedy tune played by one of the ranch hands. Tom, his limp barely noticeable, stepped onto the porch. He held out his hand to his wife. "Mrs. Garrison," he said, a smile in his voice. "I do not believe we have had our dance." Martha laughed, a sound that was new and bright. "Mr. Garrison, I believe you are right." She took his hand, and there, on the porch of the house that had been a tomb, in the high, cold, clear air of the plains, they danced. It was not a grand ball. It was a simple, swaying shuffle. A man and a woman, comfortable in their own skin, their own place, their shadows, cast long by the moonlight, danced with them, stretching out to touch the new grass. Later that week, Martha sat at the kitchen table. The house was asleep. Tom was in their bed. In the main room, a peaceful, solid presence. Ben was in his own room, the one that had been the cold pantry, now a warm, safe boy's room. Martha lit a lamp. She took out her paper, her ink. She began to write. She was not writing in a ledger. She was writing a letter. She was writing to a woman she had met at a cold stagecoach stop 200 miles east, a widow named Sarah, who had 2 small children and a look of desperation Martha knew all too well. "Dear Sarah," she wrote, "I am writing to you from the Garrison Ranch. My husband and I are in need of help. We are starting a school. We are building a community. The work is hard. The pay is fair. It is not charity. It is a job. There is a small cabin by the creek that is empty. It is warm. Bring your children. Come west. Come home." She signed it, sealed it, and knew she would send it, and others like it. She would not be the only woman to find a home here. Outside, far on the horizon, a dark, moving shadow could be seen. A small herd of bison, the first to return, was moving north, following the creek, and to the south, faint and distant. The mournful, lonely cry of a train whistle could be heard, but it was far away. The railroad had bent. The iron had yielded to the will of the land and the people. On the windy plains, Martha looked at the sleeping house, at her husband, at her son. Freedom, she thought, was not about being alone, or about fences, or about winning. Freedom was learning to hold hands and walk. Thank you so much for listening to our story. It means the world to us. We would love to know where you are tuning in from. Please, let us know in the comments. We love to see how far these tales travel. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to our channel, Wild West Tales, and give this video a like. It really helps us out. And if you really loved it, please hit that hype button. It helps get the story heard by more folks, just like you. We appreciate your support more than you know.